And stream. Oh, I gotta put in information about this right now. Good, our video shows up. Um, I'll just take when we're done with this, I'll just take the episode recording like I did with the other ones and slap it on a reel.
Okay.
I'm just typing in the description. I should have did that before I hit record. What do you prefer to be called? Connor?
Yeah, Connor.
Okay. She, they?
Yeah, she, they.
Okay. I'm just double checking so I don't forget.
Right? And your pronouns are
She, her.
yeah, okay. It's always polite to ask, I suppose.
It totally is. All right, I'm gonna go live now,
Alrighty.
and I'm also gonna see if I can share this to the Dystopia Now group. Hello everyone. I'm gonna wait for more people. Give a few more seconds for see if anybody runs into this video before I start talking. Um,
Right.
all right, give about 30 more seconds, and then we'll just start. Because if anyone,
Alrighty.
well, because if anybody's listening to this afterwards, I don't want them to be sitting here waiting for us to be ready.
Right.
Um, share, share. Um, okay. Welcome to Dystopia Now. This is episode 3. Today I'm joined by my good old friend Connor, who lived in China for 5 years. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
All right. Before we talk about China, though, I want to give a quick addendum to the last episode about Zionism. I'm seeing lots of people insist that bad actors like Tucker Carlson, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Candace Owens, since they are purporting to be anti-genocide, anti-Israel, we should believe them and support them as well. To that, I say hogwash. They are anti-Semites, and we should not listen to anti-Semites regarding Israel. Anti-Zionism, again, is not the same as anti-Semitism. Zionism and Judaism are two separate things. And if you have someone like Candace Owens blaming the Jews for slavery, we should not be listening to what she has to say about Israel. And if we have someone like Marjorie Taylor Greene using the last of her days in Congress to push anti trans legislation, she is not our ally on Israel. Mind you, she could have proposed legislation to cut funding to Israel in her last days. That would have been okay. But instead, she decided to use her last days to go after trans people. Fuck her and fuck everyone who supports her.
I couldn't agree more.
So, that having been said, let's talk about China. Um, First, before I ask you questions, and I have a couple of questions in mind to ask, I want to ask you what was you lived in China for 5 years. What was your general experience in China relative to the US?
Well, it was extremely positive compared to the United States. I li- I was living in a situation where I had all my needs met. I had a job. I had a guaranteed housing. I had uh, affordable food and just electricity and water, clean water. And anything you need, all everything that you could possibly need. And in the states, that is a lot more difficult to achieve. And that is, like the primary thing I try to explain to people who aren't communists who wonder about China is that living in the standard of living in China is just higher than it is in the United States, at least through my experience. And I haven't lived in China since 2019, and since then the standard of living has only increased.
Because of their 5 year plans, right? Don't they have 5 year plans there?
Absolutely, they do. Uh, I was I was actually in Beijing whenever they were set it during one of the party congresses when they were setting up one of their new 5 year plans, and it's every every 5 years it seems to be exceptionally successful, especially under Xi Jinping ever since 2012 when he became the leader of the party and the paramount leader of China in general.
Interesting. So, um, you said that you had a job in China. Do they guarantee employment in China?
Yeah, employment is guaranteed in China, but not for foreigners. I actually had to search and find for the job, but there's a job for anyone, and what's beautiful about China is that all work is dignified. There's dignity in all work that you do, from street sweepers to doctors, and that's what's you know one of the benefits of socialism.
That's pretty awesome. Now going back to the 5 year plan bit. Now, I will tell you, as everyone in the audience would know, the American idea of a 5 year plan is releasing Marvel slot movies. But China's 5 year plans are a little different. Do you know? Could you give some specifics on what they seek to accomplish in their 5 year plans?
Well, especially this past few decades, is the primary function of the 5 year plans are poverty alleviation, and that has been and poverty alleviation, infrastructure development, green energy, and and planning for global markets and stuff like that, which are in an imperialist world are very hard to plan for. But they seem to somehow weather the storm regardless of what's happening under the markets.
Oh,
But
good.
yeah,
It seems like the state there actually cares about the well being of their people.
right. The motto of the party is serve the people, and they take that very seriously. It's not just words. It's something that they turn into action, and they take the masked line of the people very seriously.
That's pretty good. Yeah, it sounds a lot better than what I hear Americans say about it. Because you hear a lot of Americans talking shit about China. They like, oh, China is a state capitalist. What do you think of the accusations of China being a state capitalist instead of socialist?
Well, I think that comes from that just comes from ignorance. A lot of people believe, well, they have markets and commodities. They must still be capitalist. Well, every single socialist state to ever exist, from the USSR to the DPRK to Cuba, Vietnam, Laos, the former Eastern, all of them used markets as indicators, and also um, built up their productive forces by having limited amounts of bourgeois activity within their country. They allow the bourgeois to exist to build up the productive forces, but the control of the productive forces are still under the working class. And that is what socialism is. It's the means of production being controlled by the working class and being used for social ends.
You mean like there is a still a capitalist class under a socialist state, right? Because socialism is a transitionary state. You're not going to automatically have no capitalists in a socialist state. That's not the point of a socialist state. From what I've understood about China, they don't allow their capitalist class to own the means of production, or I should say, own land or raw materials. Is that the case?
That is the case. All land in China is publicly owned, which, I mean, what capitalist country do you know has all of their land that is publicly owned? I can't think of one. But yeah, and there's also this that you hear people say, well, what about Chinese billionaires? What about Chinese billionaires?
Hmm.
And I think that that's also a misunderstanding of how um, these people are valued. Like a CEO of a company in China may have the value under the market as an indicator of billions and billions of dollars. But in reality, do they have access to this money? No, this is money that is being used for social ends, not for profitable ends.
As opposed to America, where they have complete control over their money and they use it to like buy politicians and operate the government
Absolutely.
by proxy.
Right.
That automatically already dispels a lot of ignorance about China. I've read a lot about China. I've seen a lot from Geopolitical Economy Report, which is a great YouTube channel. And from what I understand about China, they're definitely not a capitalist country. And like you said, like the reason why they are not capitalist is because their state is not run by capitalists. In the US, our state is owned and operated by the capitalist class. Our capitalist class does own land. Our capitalist class um, runs our government. Our capitalist class owns the means of production. But that is not the case in China. A very stark difference. Um,
Right.
yeah. So that already, I think, is a good start for dispelling a lot of ignorance regarding China. And I've noticed a lot of ignorance regarding China comes from people who have not studied China and the way it works.
That's absolutely correct. And it's it's not easy to study to study that because there's a lot to the Chinese system. You have Marxism, Leninism, which in and of itself studying that is a whole lifetime of work. Then you have Mao Zedong thought, then you have Deng Xiaoping theory, then
Hmm.
you have the three represents, then you have scientific outlook on development, and then you have Xi Jinping thought now, and you have all these aspects to the Chinese system, and it's a lot to dive into, and people don't really know where to begin, and it's a lot easier to just look at look at things on the surface or listen to what anti-communist or anti-Chinese people say about China and just agree with that because studying is a lot more difficult than just you know having an opinion.
Yeah, because there's certain areas where you're going to run into blatant misinformation, disinformation, and weeding through those is pretty difficult for people who are not, if you don't know what you're looking for. Um, a question about the Chinese government. How do they elect their government in general?
Well, it starts at a local level. There's actually you can run as an independent. You can run as one of, I believe it's eight political parties that are in government in the National Front government of China.
Oh, so you're saying
The
that you're saying
believe
they're not a one-party dictatorship?
No, they're not. They're actually a multi-party state, believe it or not.
That's
A
in,
lot like the deep,
I'm
which
sorry.
has three. is one more than the United States, and China has many more political parties than the United States that are actively involved in the government. Um, and this isn't, this is information that's readily available online, even from imperialist sources. And people just ignore it. They say, no, it's a one party state, blah, blah, blah. But that just comes from a misunderstanding of what new democracy is. And new democracy is what China has built, starting with Mao Zedong.
Hmm.
And it was this idea that it's represented in the flag with where the little stars represent the different classes in China, and the big star represents the Communist Party, and that's sort of uh, how things are run. Is it that on a local level, Communist Party and other political party officials are elected, and the higher up it goes, the more centralized it is. But eventually, the highest body in the country is the National Congress, and they meet for the National Congress every 5 years, and they make decisions like the 5 year plans, and they do other make other decisions within the country, social decisions, cultural decisions, all sorts of things.
But they are
And
direct representatives of the working class.
absolutely, they have to be elected.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, the Chinese democracy is very deep and rich.
Are there campaign donations in China like there are in the U.S.?
No, I don't believe so. I think money inside politics is strictly forbidden. Um, it might get you in big trouble, especially if it's millions. If it's millions, that might get you executed.
Oh, we're executing billionaires. Oh, okay. I about that. As a little tangent, what do they what I know China has executed some of their billionaires. What do they typically do that for? What typical crimes warrant that type of punishment?
Well, taking money that is meant to be used for social ends and using it for their own personal means.
Mm,
Bribes, siphoning off the top of state funds, which most Chinese companies receive, um, or even siphoning off the funds of the profits that are being made by the company themselves. Any sort of corruption is completely just a no-no, and it could end with you losing your life.
wow, that is quite a what's the word I'm looking for here? Um, I don't know what word I'm looking for, but that sounds a lot harsher than the way that what happens in the U.S. You know, with U.S. corruption leads to just more corruption. But it seems like
Right,
China is not interested in corruption. They seem more interested in punishing corruption as instead of rewarding corruption.
right.
Um,
And when we reward corruption, we end up with figures and incidents like Luigi Mangione. And in China, that would never happen because they don't need a Luigi Mangione in China.
it sounds like Luigi Mangione is running the government in China.
Yeah, someone like him.
So, how before I ask you the next question, I want to harken back to the idea of democracy. Like, do most Chinese people feel like they are living in a democracy in China?
Yeah. You ask a Chinese person, is this a democratic country? They'll say yes, it is, but it's not. But they won't say it's not like a Western liberal democracy. This is Chinese democracy. They'll make it very clear that this is their version of democracy. But yes, they do believe they live under a democracy.
Yeah, because the reason why I ask you that is because I do see a lot of Westerners confusing their own Western democracy, their own liberal democracy, with just democracy. I think it's problematic for Americans to be calling their own liberal Western democracy just calling it democracy, because
Mm,
then any deviation from their own idea of Western democracy to them is not a democracy. It kind of blinds them to understanding other forms of democracy.
absolutely. And there have been, you know, myriads of forms of democracy throughout history, and especially throughout socialist experiments in the 20th century. I mean, one example, this isn't China, but it's Libya, socialist Jamahiriya. They had a direct democratic system that had local councils running everything that anarchists would have salivated over. But
Mhm.
that was destroyed. That was destroyed in 2011 thanks to Obama. Thanks, Obama. Um, so yeah.
So how would you like people? I think a lot of people are confused about Chinese socialism with Chinese characteristics. How would you
Mm.
how would you describe socialism with Chinese characteristics to somebody?
Ooh, well, it takes into account cultural aspects like Confucianism and Chinese culture in general.
Mm-hmm.
It takes in market aspects, market reform aspects, which came out in the 80s under Deng Xiaoping. So I would say you have a form of socialism that is a mix between state and market socialism,
Mm-hmm.
and this this is combined with the peculiar national peculiarities of China. Really are what define what socialism with Chinese characteristics are.
Okay, interesting. From what I read, there's something called state-owned enterprises in China. Do you know
Yeah.
anything about? Do you know? Now in the U.S., I don't think we have state-owned enterprises in the U.S. Do we? I don't think so.
Um. Unless we sold off U.S. Steel, I mean, I think we do. Maybe have U.S. Steel used to be one. I don't know if we sold it off yet or not, but most of that has all been privatized in the United States, and
Yeah.
state-owned enterprises and make up the majority of Chinese companies.
Mm-hmm.
And I worked for uh, I worked for state-owned schools. My ex in China worked for state-owned urban planning and development firms, and it's just most people work for these state-owned enterprises. There are private companies, but most people work for the state. And a side note, state workers are also used as relief workers. So after a typhoon hit where I lived in Zhuhai in southern China near Macau, it destroyed a bunch of trees and buildings and everything. And within a week, it was all the state workers from office workers to construction workers were all out fixing everything. And within a week, everything was back up and running as normal. So that was pretty cool.
That sounds pretty cool. Um, what would you say is like some of the biggest state-owned enterprises in China that might surprise people?
Uh, um, well, they're tech companies like Taobao and the company that owns Weixin, which is WeChat, Tencent. Tech companies like that are th- that are putting out some of the best, apps and AI and all this other stuff. Are It's all coming out of state-owned enterprises.
Hmm.
Um, but name them a bunch of them specifically. I'm not familiar with all the state-owned enterprises that exist.
There's one I want to touch upon that I've read about, and that's banks, banking.
Bank-
In from what I
yeah,
heard in
banks.
yeah, from what I heard, banks in China are state owned.
Yeah, I still have my China Construction Bank debit card. I used to bank at China Construction Bank. There's China Agricultural Bank. There's the Chinese National Bank. There's all kinds of banks that can be used by anyone. Even though it was a construction bank, I could still open an account there. But they mostly deal with construction, investing in construction projects and stuff like that. But yeah, there are no private banks in China.
What advantage does state-owned banking do for China that we don't see with like the privatized banks in the US?
Well, they can't gouge people on loans for one. Everything, if you want to take out a loan from a bank, there's heavy regulations on how much interest they can charge you and things like that. But also when it comes to investing in in uh, infrastructure projects or state-owned enterprises, you have less corruption because they're not doing it for the incentive of profit. They're doing it for social ends,
Hmm.
and that is the biggest difference. That the banks are operating under uh, social ends, and they're not trying to make more money.
Right, because in the US we live purely by the profit motive.
Right.
Um, I love the idea that the banks in China are state owned and used for the will of the people. Now, private entities have to go through Chinese banks, don't they?
Absolutely.
That kind of puts like a sort of a safeguard on things, and I like that idea.
Yeah.
Um,
One of many cards. Yeah. Yeah.
let's see. When you lived there, did what sense of did you get about Chinese attitude towards like black folks and like the global South?
Well, if you're talking about just an individual Chinese person's reaction to a black person, it's usually curiosity.
Hmm.
But that's with any foreigner. Like if you're white or not Chinese, they're gonna be curious. They're gonna be like, "Whoa, where are you from?" And they're gonna want to know about where your country and things like that. But on an individual level, it's just a massive amount of curiosity. On a larger level, on a state level, I feel like China feels like they have a responsibility to help the people of the global south, which is why they give so many work visas to Africans and so many student visas to Africans, and why they spend trillions of dollars in developing dams and roads and turning the lights on in Africa. I think it's uh, don't quote me on this, but I think they've turned on the lights for over 700 million people in Africa. So giving electricity to over 700 million people. And that's how, the wider Chinese people feel like they have, now that they're in a leading position. They were once in the same position that uh, these victims of imperialism were in. And now they're not victims of imperialism anymore. They've conquered imperialism. And now they feel obligated to, help these victims. And they're doing it. And I think that's awesome.
Yeah, I wonder why the US never did that.
They were too busy pumping money into countries like South Korea or West Germany to make them seem like the free market was better than socialism.
Yeah, and now they're doing the same thing with Argentina.
Yeah, exactly. What was it, $40 billion the other day?
Forty
Oh my
billion
god.
dollars with a B.
Oh
Um,
my god.
yeah, so you already mentioned a lot of good that the China is doing on an international scale, especially with Africa and the global South. Now, China is would you say China is now like the leading? economic power in the world.
I would, I would say China has surpassed the United States because, for one simple reason, China can produce things and the United States can't. And I think that the whole GDP argument is bullshit, imperialist bullshit.
Hmm.
So I think we have to base it off who can produce the most for the world. And the United States has never produced for the world; they've only produced for themselves. And so, yeah, I think the leading light in this world right now is China and the other socialist states that are allied with it.
Um, so what was I gonna? So when the United States is internationalist, they tend to like extract resources, install dictators. But when coup countries, but China seems to be cooperating with other countries
Hmm.
instead of competing with them.
Right, right. They have this philosophy of peaceful coexistence, and I couldn't tell you the 5 points of their peaceful coexistence off the top of my head right now, but there are 5 points, and you can go look them up. But this peaceful coexistence philosophy uh, really has them in a position of non-interventionism, which makes the ultra left seed. They want China to be overthrowing governments and installing communist, countries all across the world now that they have all this power. But
Right,
really, that's not how China thinks. China thinks we're going to peacefully coexist with the rest of the world, show them that our way is the right way, and suit they'll follow. I'm sure they will.
so it
People
makes
will
the
want to do.
ultra left mad that China is leading by example instead of trying to force change around the world.
Right.
I've seen a lot of ultra left people complaining about their relationships with Israel. Um, what can you tell us
Yes.
about China's relationship with Israel?
Well, China's relationship with Israel is leaves a lot to be desired, in my opinion.
Hmm.
Um, I think that if you know, who am I to tell China what to do? I wouldn't tell them what to do, but if I was in charge, I would sanction and blockade Israel.
Hmm.
But they don't sell weapons to Israel. They don't give them anything to help them kill Palestinians. They just trade with them like they would trade with Myanmar
Hmm.
or Cambodia or any of these other countries that people say have questionable leadership. Trading with Sudan, Congo. Should they trade with everybody?
Right.
But I still feel like that China, it leaves a lot to be desired because there is an active genocide going on against the Palestinian people, and
Hmm.
the world needs to li- literally choke Israel, in my opinion,
Hmm.
and China isn't doing that. And could I tell you the reason why? No, I couldn't tell you the reason why.
Probably because they want to preserve their image as like you said, trying to, or like I said, trying to be an example of peace and cooperation.
Right.
I can understand them. I can understand them trading non-weapons with Israel. Like the people there, regardless of whether they support the genocide or not, there are still people to be traded with. I understand that. At least they're not trading weapons with Israel. But like you said, they should definitely be taking a stronger stance on what Israel is doing. And I'm really glad that we can understand all the positives of China while also being critical of aspects like this.
Right, because no socialist project is perfect.
Hmm.
And like you said, China's adherence to the peaceful coexistence and leading by example, they're very, very strict about that. and that explains a lot of the reason why they still do have a relationship with Israel.
I heard they just sent troops to Venezuela. Is that the case?
Ooh, I don't know. You hear about that all the time. I know they've been sending aid.
Hmm.
Um, I don't know if they've sent troops or not. If they have, then fantastic. But that also goes against sort of their whole wanting to peacefully coexist ideology. Now, if it was if the spark point was Taiwan, it may be different. I don't think that China would back down, but I really don't see. I see maybe sending peacekeepers, but not military
Hmm.
contingents.
Let's talk a little bit about Taiwan now that you brought that up. I was planning on bringing that up at some point, but I think now is the perfect time. Um, do you know any of the history of Taiwan, the founding,
Sure.
that you could enlighten us on, like the war, a little bit about the war that brought people to that area of China?
Well, Chinese people have been living in Taiwan for centuries. Um, there still is to this day a very 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 small indigenous population, but Chinese people have lived there since I believe the Yuan dynasty, which was the dynasty of Kublai Khan
Hmm.
and the Mongols is ever since Chinese people have been living in Taiwan, I think. And but in the more recent history, after the Civil War between the KMT nationalists and the CPC Chinese, um, the nationalists fled with a bunch of U.S. gold
Hmm.
to the island of Taiwan with the help of the United States. There were United States troops fighting against the communists in China after World War II. Not a
Hmm.
lot of people know that. And they were failing miserably, but they were there.
Hmm.
Hundreds of thousands of US troops. And they helped the nationalists and Chiang Kai shek run away to Taiwan and set up an illegal government, which the U.S. has been propping up ever since,
Hmm.
and it's been recognized by almost the entire international community, barring a few small Polynesian states and like the last absolute monarchy in Africa. Uh, they recognize Taiwan as a province of China because it is legally under the UN a province of China. Taiwan is an illegal government, has an illegal government. The Republic of China is an illegal government, and they also claim Mongolia too, which is funny.
Hmm.
The Taiwanese government claims not only all of China but Mongolia as well. So but there's this growing sentiment in Taiwan that they're not Chinese anymore; they're Taiwanese, which is not a real thing. They're Chinese people. They're Han Chinese people. Um. So yeah, that's a little bit what I know about Taiwan. If you have any other questions, go ahead and ask.
Is there a language difference between Taiwanese and Chinese?
Well, there's local there's local languages everywhere you go in China,
Hmm.
but the main language spoken in Taiwan is Mandarin, and the main language spoken in mainland is Mandarin. So no, there's not much of a language difference.
So the
There
only
is a
real
naming difference.
there's a naming difference. The only real difference besides the name is there really is no difference besides the name that I can think of. Except, are a lot of people there? How many of the pro Taiwanese protesters do you think are backed by like CIA and U.S. forces?
I, they wouldn't exist without the CIA or US forces. They only started coming to prominence after the KMT, which is the nationalists, started trying to reproach with the mainland, trying to peacefully reproach with the mainland. which is what they're trying to do now. Actually, the current leader of the KMT for the first time ever went to uh, a ceremony that was mourning the deaths of Chinese communists during the White Terror on Taiwan that
Hmm.
happened after the Chinese Civil War. And this is a big deal. And the KMT is also sending representatives to mainland China during the Victory Day against Japan, the 80th anniversary of the victory against fascist Japan. And there's they want the KMT wants to reproach with the mainland China while these Taiwanese separatists, which are backed by the National Endowment of Democracy and the CIA,
Hmm.
want to completely separate and start a war.
Hmm. Yeah, they've been pushing that for a while now,
Yes,
huh?
at least since the
Yeah. So we've covered that. Yeah. Um, what? There's a lot of people out there who think that, like, is it Deng Xiaoping? Am I right in pronouncing that correctly?
Deng Xiaoping. Yeah, Deng Xiaoping.
Yeah, they think that he deviated from Maoism by opening up China. What would you say to somebody who's making such a claim?
Well, first of all, I would tell them that Maoism was invented in the 80s, which is hilarious. Um, and and he did Mao Zedong was a Marxist Leninist,
Hmm.
and in China, Marxism Leninism had something called Mao Zedong thought, and people think, oh, Deng Xiaoping deviated from Mao Zedong thought and Marxism Leninism, and that isn't true at all. All he did was open up and reform.
Hmm.
Now, what does that mean? It means loosening the markets to build up productive forces and opening up for foreign experts to come in and help them develop, which in hindsight worked. It worked amazingly. It was the spark that lifted 800 million people out of poverty. And
Hmm.
if you think that capitalism can lift 800 million people out of poverty, you're wacko.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds like they went from being like sort of like a nationalist kind of Marxist to an internationalist kind of Marxist. But it doesn't say that to me. It does not seem like the Marxism Leninism went away like some people claim. To me, it just feels like they went internationalist and allowed the rest of the international community to help them while they built up in a way to help others. And now they're paying it back in the global south.
Right, right. And I think a lot of what Deng Xiaoping did was learning from the mistakes of the Soviet Union,
Hmm.
of being so closed and stagnant during the 70s, and and um and seeing the mistakes of Mikhail Gorbachev definitely
Hmm.
probably gave him a lot to caution on. But I mean, look what we still have. We still have a socialist state. It didn't disappear. The workers still own the means of production.
Hmm.
There's just an opening up and reform. And if you
Hmm.
don't like that, then you have some sort of pure fetishized purity
Hmm.
thing going on in your head about what socialism really is. It's socialism isn't a rigid definition. It's different in every country, it's different in every time, and it takes all kinds of different forms. And whenever you give it this rigid definition that doesn't meet, then you're never going to be happy and you're never going to find true quote unquote socialism.
If if China had not done the reform and opening up, what do you think their fate would have been? Um,
I think eventually they would have been overcome by imperialist forces.
mhm.
Because after the fall of the Soviet Union, we had the unipolar world where
Mhm.
the United States and its allies dominated geopolitically. And without opening up and being friendly with this new unipolar United States dominated world, they would have been eventually overcome by imperialism. But they
Mhm.
weren't. They said, haha, we tricked you. Look at what we did. And now the United States is shitting their pants at the fact that China surpassed them.
Yeah, they're coping and seething.
Yes.
At what at what cost, right?
Yeah, what cost?
I wanted to ask you. This is sort of like a out of the way question of what we've been talking about, but as a trans person, I want to ask you, what is China's general attitude towards gay and trans people, or the LGBTQ at large?
Um, so let me start with trans people because uh, China has always had trans people, and they're very open about trans people. Well, actually, there's this famous former PLA soldier and ballerina and TV show host Jing Xing, who inspired me to come out as a trans woman, a non-binary trans woman, but trans nonetheless.
Hmm.
And she's a TV host and openly trans, and no one gives a flying fuck, you know,
Hmm.
no one cares. And but sexuality, on the other hand, is a lot more private in China. So
Hmm.
even straight sex is sort of taboo, let alone gay sex. So it's talking about sex is like, oh no, 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 that's something private you keep in your bedroom.
Hmm.
So that's their attitude. They're a little behind when it comes to things like gay marriage, and but I think they'll one day, allow that to happen especially whenever it's popular among the masses.
Hmm. Yeah, I
But
mean,
there is a large LGBTQ plus community there, and I have LGBT friends from China. Anyone who spends 5 seconds on Red Note sees that there's so many lesbians and gay people
mhm.
and trans people from China, and they're everywhere and they're open about it. And it's they what the biggest difference is that they're not actively trying to erase transness
Mhm.
and the LGBT community like they are here in the United States.
It does not sound like any of the Chinese government is focused on that. It sounds like the Chinese
No,
government is focused on improving the material conditions of people's lives, whereas the U.S. is, trying to systematically destroy the lives of trans people. It does not sound like China is even trying to do that whatsoever.
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
That's great to know. That's great to know. A lot of people think that China hates trans people.
No, they just got to look up. Just got to look it up. There's tons of. I remember one of the first TV shows. I was with an ex in China, and she was Chinese, and she was watching a TV show, and I was like, "What is this show about?" And she's like, "Oh, it's about two gay guys." I'm like, "But I heard gay people weren't allowed on TV in China when in the United States." She's like, "That's stupid. Where'd you hear that?" So it's like the myths that you hear about China.
Yeah,
Don't even
exactly.
get me started unless you want me to on social credit score, which isn't even real or worth talking about.
I think that's an interesting thing because I didn't even think of that to talk about, but we should probably dispel that as well. How would you
Yeah,
dispel
yeah.
someone's accusations of a social credit score in China?
Well, first of all, thank goodness they don't have a credit score in China like we do here in the United States. What a fucking dystopian system that is.
Mhm.
Anyway, social credit scores don't exist for the average Chinese person. Most of them don't even know the term. I remember I asked about it before I even got there, and I was looked at with a confusion. What are you talking about? Social credit score? There is no such thing as social credit score. Well, it turns out there might be such thing as a social credit score, but it only exists for people like private company CEOs and people
Mhm.
who work in private companies and things like that, where they have to behave a certain way or they will lose their privileges
Mhm.
of owning a private company. It's as simple as that.
So, what people think the social credit score is really just a way to hold private companies accountable.
Yes.
Unlike the US, where we have an actual credit score system, which, by the way, the FICO credit score system was only invented in the 1980s.
Yep.
Um, and I've hated it ever since. I was born in '87, but I've never saw like it's never made any sense to me. I see a lot of
Yeah.
hypocrisy coming from people accusing China of a social credit score for people, while we have an actual credit score system created by the capitalist class to put us all in debt. China does not seem
Yep.
interested in putting its own citizens into massive amounts of debt, and I think that's a very clear difference with the way they treat their people to the way in the U.S. we treat ours.
Yeah, I mean, we love putting people into debt. They love pulling people out of poverty. It's just two different ways of seeing the world.
Sierra Melody says, not gonna lie, that social credit system sounds awesome as fuck. I agree. I think holding private companies accountable is definitely awesome as fuck. Here,
Yeah.
here's one thing I wanted to talk about, and definitely you can dispel this because we've talked about it before. Is the accusations of a Uyghur genocide?
Oh, the
Now,
Uyghur genocide.
now you hear a lot of people talking about the Uyghur genocide, and they call you genocide denier if you say it's not a genocide. How would you describe what people falsely view as a Uyghur genocide?
Well, it all originates the whole claims of a Uyghur genocide originate from an evangelical right wing preacher named Adrian Zins, who made up, who saw that in Western China, CIA backed jihadist groups were being rounded up and re educated and re released back into society. And Adrian Zinn saw this and said, no, these are concentration camps for all Uyghurs. They're, they're doing a genocide against the Uyghurs, blah, 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 blah. And so I never believed it, but I thought, well, why not see Xinjiang for myself, which is the name of the province where the Uyghurs live?
Mm-hmm.
And I went and I met Uyghurs and I worked in kindergartens with Uyghurs. I have talked to Uyghurs. I've gone to Uyghur restaurants. I've seen them wear their religious headgear. I've been in their mosques. I've
Mm-hmm.
seen them with their religious beards. And I've had tea with them. And I've had their halal food with them. And they're not being genocided. Their culture is being promoted. You go to Xinjiang and on every building, their language is on every building and on every street sign. You look at the money, national money of China, their language is on the national money of China. And these people are not some separate entity to the Chinese people. They are Chinese.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how the Chinese see their multi-ethnic society. See, China is a multi-ethnic society. You don't have to be Han to be Chinese. You can be uh uh Maoi, you can be Manchu, you can be Mongolian, you can be Tibetan, you can be Uyghur, but you're all Chinese, and that's how they see it. And there's not a genocide going on because they would be killing their own people. Chinese people killing their own people. That doesn't make any sense.
Mm-hmm. So Chinese people are not killing Uyghur Muslims. They're not. It sounds like they're not restricting their culture or their religious practices.
I've
So
literally witnessed a mosque being built in my neighborhood for Hui and Uyghur Chinese Muslims.
yeah. So any accusations that have become really widespread of any form of genocide just seems to have been made up by one man and spread by, the opportunists in the U.S. who seek to demonize China.
Yep, absolutely. And for anyone who doesn't believe us, well, I implore you, go to speak to Uyghurs who live in the People's Republic of China. Go and talk to them. Ask them, are you being genocided? Is your language being suppressed? Ask them. Go ask them, and they'll tell you the truth.
Meanwhile, you have American lawmakers trying to ban Sharia law, which doesn't make
Right.
any sense in the U.S. If anything, I
Right.
think people in the U.S., right wingers, fascists, evangelicals, they seem to be the ones who want to ban languages and other cultures besides Western Christianity within the bounds of the U.S. system. It seems hypocritical to me to accuse China of trying to do what they themselves want to do.
What they themselves have already done with the Native Americans
Right,
and the
right,
first,
exactly.
and and it's just the ultimate hypocrisy. Every imperialist accusation is just a confession.
Hmm. Especially since they hate Muslims. I mean, Islamophobia
Yeah,
is,
we kill Muslims. The United States kills Muslims every day.
yeah, and Islamophobia has become like a well-rounded, socially accepted form of bigotry.
Right.
Meanwhile China's building mosques for Muslims.
And Islam is one of the major protected religions in China. There are, I believe, five major protected religions, and Islam is one of them, which means they have special protection under the law.
Hmm, that sounds awesome.
Yeah.
Is China currently going to war with anybody?
No, China likes peace.
So the U.S. is right now is like bombing more people than any other U.S. president, trying to start wars here and there. And China over here is building roads, railways, transportation for people not only within the country but in the global South and Africa. And it seems like there's one party here is being productive and constructive, while another party, by that I mean another country, here is being destructive. And it seems like the U.S. is
Exactly.
not only being destructive towards the nations that they're bombing and trying to start wars with, but like we're crumbling from the inside out because we're not taking care of our own people.
You're absolutely correct. And, that's the starkest difference. Whenever I came back here, that's whenever everything became difficult again. And my reasons for coming back to the United States are many, but one of them was I want to extend the privilege that the Chinese people have after their revolution to our people here in the United States, especially the oppressed people and the working class people. And I can't do that if I'm comfortably living in China. And
Mm-hmm.
so, as many revolutionaries have said before, go home and organize for revolution in your own country,
Mm-hmm.
and don't run away. And so that's why I came back.
Yeah, it takes a lot of privilege to be able to run away too, because I'm too poor to even move out of my state.
Yeah, I was lucky. I got a job. I sold everything I had, and they paid the job that I got paid for initially my apartment. They paid for my plane ticket over there. They organized my visa. They did everything for me. The kindergarten that hired me to
Mm.
teach English, and so I was luckily, because I only reason that I was extended that privilege is because I was also privileged enough to go to university. So yeah, getting a degree is one of the barriers to just being able to go to move to China. If you like China so much, why don't you move there? You know? Well, it's not so easy.
Yeah, whenever I talk to a lot of people online, and I make the arguments about how much better the governments are in places like China, Vietnam, even the DPRK, like all the benefits that they've had under socialism. And I get told the same thing by these people. I get told, "Why don't you just move there?" Um, well, I'm not Vietnamese, I'm not Korean, I'm not Chinese. I am, and I'm also too poor to move. Are you going to pay for my plane ticket? Probably not. but like
Exactly.
but like the but the privilege of somebody when you simply explain the truth and you can cite information. I cited Google search results to people explaining clearly how Vietnam and DPRK have improved under socialism, and instead of acknowledging the improvements they tell me to move. That is such an individualist prescription as far as I'm concerned.
Yep, absolutely.
It comes from such a place of ignorance. Like these are the same people that every time a Democrat is president, they constantly complain about the country, but you don't see them moving.
Right, right.
But but
It's
go on.
Go ahead.
No, no, you first.
Now you.
But Xi Jinping is a dictator, right? Doesn't he impose his will on everybody in the country?
No, no, no. He's a democratically elected, beloved leader with a higher approval rating than any U.S. president has ever had. So,
Oh yeah, yeah. What do you know his approval rating as of right now?
well, I mean, it usually hovers above 80%.
Wow, 80%. Our president right now has 30%, and our Congress has like what, 10%?
Yeah, bunch of bunch of imperialists, either incompetent or just evil imperialists, one or the other. It's just awful.
Yeah, I mean, if you live in a country where your approval rating of your own leader is like 30 something percent, and you want to criticize a country and a leader of a country whose approval rating is over 80% on average, um, that just seems hypocritical to me. And a lot of Western leftist types like to do that. They like to say, like, all these things about China from a perspective of living in a country with very, very low approval rating for their own leaders. I say that these people who are complaining about China should work on cleaning our own house before criticizing the house of another.
Absolutely. And that's we can take inspiration from these socialist countries, but we really have to do our own revolution here at home, or we'll basically all oppressed people and the working class, which the majority of the working class in this country doesn't realize, are fucked. We're
Mm-hmm.
fucked. And we have to organize now, or, you know, we're going to be left in the dust of history in this awful. So it's going to be awful.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
socialism or barbarism.
right, exactly. China had their revolution, and they are now actively working to improve the world. We definitely need to learn from that and organize our own revolution before we all die. Um,
Absolutely.
well, it's been an hour now. I think we can wrap things up unless there's any aspect of China that I forgot to ask you about that you really wanted to talk about.
Um, no, there's there. I mean, we could talk about China all day, but the only thing I wanted to do is just plug a book that came out, and that's it.
Oh, what book is it?
There's this new book written by 30 plus activists from many organizations, including the Workers' World Party, which I am a candidate of, and also Frizzo, Freedom Road Socialist Organization, and Friends of Socialist China wrote a book called China Changes Everything. And there's a different chapter, it's written by 30 plus activists, and there's a different chapter about everything. For example, Sarah Flounders wrote a chapter about socialism or socialist or imperialist. Is China socialist or imperialist? And goes through the reasons why China is socialist and why it's not imperialist using the Leninist methodology.
Oh,
And
nice.
there's another chapter written about the escalating war plans by the United States, written by the one of the leaders of Frizzo, Mick Kelly. So there's a lot of good in that book, and there's chapters about space travel, about turning on the lights in Africa, like I
Mhm.
was talking about earlier. And I really recommend people check it out. It's a really fantastic book. It's called China Changes Everything.
One last thing before we go. that you reminded me. How would you, in a summarily way, describe imperialism, and how is and why is China not? Why is what they are doing not imperialist?
Well, I would like to send everyone over to the class on the workers.org website about whether China is imperialist or not, and you can get a lot of information there. I'll explain a little bit of it here, but you can find it under the classes over there if anybody wants to understand that a little bit better. But Lenin described imperialism in a lot of different aspects, and it's the highest stage of capitalism and all that. And simply put, that in order to be imperialist, you have to have a capitalist mode of production, and
And
China
China
doesn't
doesn't.
have a capitalist mode of production, and uh, that's basically it. And for people who uh, who don't understand Lenin, it's very easy to think, oh, uh, China's exporting capital, therefore they're imperialist. That's not the only aspect of imperialism that exists. The export of capital is not the sole driving force behind imperialism. That's it.
Okay, so from what I understand, you need a capitalist mode of production to be even considered imperialist.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, imperialism is the highest stage of capitalism.
It seems to me like the difference between the economies of China and the US is that China has become a lot more industrialized, and
Yes.
while the US has deindustrialized and has become financialized. Now, I know from Imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism, Lenin talks about one of the stages before it becomes imperialist is financialization.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So it would seem that the financialization of the US economy does coincide with its imperialist ambitions, whereas China is simply helping other people. They're not extracting resources, they're not extracting profits from anything. So I see no reason to call China imperialist myself.
Yeah. And you're right. And I just implore people to really really get into Lenin before they start claiming whether or not a country is imperialist or not. And that goes for a lot of countries that do have capitalist modes of production
Mhm.
but do not do imperialism. For example, some African countries, some Latin American countries have capitalist modes of production, but they're not imperialist themselves.
Right. Well, thank you for coming on and talking about China today. I think this was definitely a banger of an episode. Um, you know a lot about what you're talking about, and that helped out quite a bit. Thank you,
Thank
Connor.
you.
Thank you for coming on the show. And we will see you all probably next week. I don't know what time we're going to broadcast. I'm thinking Saturday or Sunday, hopefully Saturday, but I don't know what day it's going to be yet because I think I'm getting my job back and I don't know if they're going to have me work on Saturday. So stay tuned on Dystopia Now. I will be keeping people updated about when exactly the next episode is going to come out. But I'm shooting for sometime this coming next weekend, either Saturday or Sunday. Thank you all for listening.
Thank you for having me. It was
Thank
fun.
thank you.
Bye bye.
And we are done. That was great. I love that. I even learned a few
Yeah,
things.
that's good. I'm glad. Yeah,